Good afternoon then, everybody. Whether you're joining us for the first time or you were on the Zoom last week, a very warm welcome to you and thank you very much for joining us for this, the second in our new series of BRTuk Lunchtime Masterclasses supported by Atkins, in which Tom Skidmore of Transport for West Midlands, who we did think might be being joined by Angela Hosford, but it looks like it's Tom on his own, that we're waiting to see what transpires. We'll talk to us about developing BRT in the West Midlands, but more of that in just a minute. So I have pressed the record button, so we should be capturing the whole session for people to watch afterwards. If you would, please make sure that you are muted. This is really important, and please stay muted during the whole session. That means if you sneeze or someone rings you up or whatever, we don't have to share that. And I think that's probably in everyone's interests. But if you do want to communicate, and we very much hope that you will, please do use the chat function to ask questions, make comments, and I will put those comments and questions to Tom at the end of his presentation. To introduce myself, I am James Freeman from BRTuk, and I'm chairing obviously today's session and indeed the whole programme of lunchtime masterclasses over the coming weeks. Just a reminder for those of you who weren't on last time, BRTuk is a ginger group and was created a bit more than 15 years ago with the drive of my old friend and one-time colleague Bob Tebb. And his name will be one that is well known across the world of BRT. Our purpose is to spread knowledge and good practice in the field, not just of BRT, but for high quality bus operations across the board.
Yeah, I got that on mine.
There's the example of someone not muted.
Actually, so I didn't see all that.
Let's see if we can mute him, shall we?
Yeah.
I was going to go to you after lunch to see.
Yeah, can I have a chat after? I just want to get a few. Well, if you got time, a few PowerPointy things.
It's quite fun when people mute and don't mute, is it? Anyway, right. Gwen is muted now, so that's okay. Here we are, just an hour at lunchtime on a Thursday, running through to the start of July. Short and sharp, we'll be done by 1:30. Each session is a simple Zoom run by me. Our media partners, Passenger Transport, and we have received support for our advertising from Atkins. So let me now introduce Tom. Tom Skidmore. He joined Transport for West Midlands, which was then Centro, 9 years ago, first working on the delivery of the LSTF programme and then acting as programme manager for the Swift Smart Card programme. He began work on the development of the Sprint programme in 2015, helping to establish the Sprint standards and defining the network. And he is a senior development manager in that role. He's overseen the early design and production of the final business cases for the A34 and A45 Sprint projects. He's now working on confirming the deliverables of phase 2 Sprint and the design and development of new bus priority measures included within Transport for West Midlands Bus Service Improvement Plan, BSIP. Tom's goal, he says, is to deliver bus priority that creates better cities and towns. Well, I've seen some of the slides and I can tell you this is going to be a very, very interesting session. And so I'm really, really delighted to welcome Tom as our lunchtime masterclass speaker this Thursday. Now, I have facilitated screen sharing for you already, Tom. So hopefully we can go over to you and take it from there.
It says it's disabled, James, when I'm clicking on.
Right, well, we'll make it. Oh, it's flipped back again. Yes, there you are. Now I've clicked correctly now. So hopefully we're in business. This is direct from Weaver to Wearer, this system, and has its moments, as you can imagine. Right, but this is looking good because we can see your screen and we can see what you do with it too, of course. Want to go to slideshow.
Bear with me. Yeah, it's just because the bit at the top is in the way. Oh, there we go.
Good. Right.
Okay. Hopefully you can all see that.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the introduction, James, and thanks for inviting myself along to present at this at BRT UK. We've had a lot of engagement with BRT UK in the past. I think this is my third or fourth time of presenting, but actually we might have something to show this time rather than just some ideas, I suppose. And this is really what we're going to try and cover in this session. A quick introduction as to what Sprint is. Then some visuals actually about what is being delivered on the ground, so people actually have an understanding. As I said, a lot of the time we've been talking about strategy or the standards, but now you can actually see what some of the things that we're doing look like. And quickly on the shelters and how important those have been to us, some of the challenges around delivery, and then talking about the future, how that fits into not just the overall levelling up agenda, but actually what I've called levelling up bus. And then finally, some words on modelling. Okay, so what is Sprint? Well, it's fairly simple, really. It's a bus priority project that's aiming to improve reliability and bus journey times. The first route that we're delivering Sprint on is, or first corridor, should I say, is Walsall to Solihull. It's around 27 kilometres long. It goes via Birmingham city centre, and that cross-city connectivity is really important to the project. And these are sort of the objectives that probably chime with a lot of other people's objectives for projects. It's enabling residents to access more places within 45 minutes, improve their satisfaction, and get that shift from car to public transport. But why do we do it, I suppose? Well, bus reliability and shorter journey times means those residents have better access to jobs and services. And if you have better access to jobs and services, and you can be better linked to jobs that are more suited to you, that increases productivity. And what does productivity lead to? Well, that leads to growth in the region in general, economic growth, inclusive growth. But what else does it do? Well, better bus journey times leads to more public transport use, and that leads to lower emissions and better active travel, which finally leads to a healthier and happier society. So when we say, you know, we're improving bus priority, actually what we're trying to achieve is more growth and a healthier, happy society, and those link to the Combined Authorities, or West Midlands Combined Authorities' key objectives as well. But when we break down the Sprint project, it can be, it's better to break it down into three key elements. The first is the infrastructure, and that is the bus lanes, the changes to junctions. These are all the things you see on the ground, so widening, then changes to traffic regulation, so in terms of changes to parking, and the bus stops themselves. The second element is the services, and I haven't said a Sprint service, so whilst there is a what some people might call a Sprint service, that is the route that runs all the way from Walsall to Solihull, actually this corridor affects a lot more than that one route or one bus, because there's around 200 buses that use this corridor every day, and 20 million passengers or passenger trips in a year. So, you know, so when you can't just break it down and say, okay, this Walsall to Sprint service, Walsall to Solihull service, which is 4 million, you've got to actually see how does that affect everything else. So that means looking at all of those other routes, looking at the stopping patterns, looking at the frequencies of those services, and making it all tie together into a cohesive package. And then finally, it's then how it's used in practice. It's all very well setting out delivering this infrastructure or changing the services, but actually, does it work? How is it maintained? How is it monitored? Are we achieving the journey times we said? And just to re-emphasize, this is across the whole corridor. So as I've said, it's around 200 buses that will benefit. Okay, and then we've had to split up the actual delivery as well of those three elements into a pre-Commonwealth Games, and the Commonwealth Games are in Birmingham this year, and then a post-Commonwealth Games. So phase one is in delivery now. Well, it's almost complete. On time and on budget. That was around £88 million, and then the second phase has just been approved, and that's £56 million. And we've had to break it up for reasons of the funding timing, but also to ensure we can get some of those benefits for everybody on who's attending for the Commonwealth Games. And when we break it across those, what's been delivered on each of those elements across each phase, well, in the first phase, we've got about 70% of the bus priority, 3/4 of the shelters, and we will be introducing a cross-city service. So that will be the first cross-city service in the region for a very long time, running through Walsall to Solihull. And then the second phase is more bus priority, more shelters, more integration with the rest of the network in terms of active travel. But then the final piece of the jigsaw, which is the zero emission articulated vehicle, which will only come into service at the end of phase 2. And it's really then that you can say that is the sprint project on this corridor, and the sprint service enters operation. And so quickly, just areas of how we're delivering this. A lot of the bus priority, this shows where the bus lanes are, and it pretty much what we're trying to achieve here is bus lanes across the length of the route, so in both directions. And the first phase tends to be more towards the city centre, and then you can see that pink section is what will be delivered in phase 2. And then on the A34, it's a little bit more piecemeal in terms of where phase 1 and phase 2 is, but again, it's extending bus lanes and then extending them further in phase 2. So what does this actually look like at the moment? So these are photos from the last couple of weeks that I've taken. There's a lot of cones out there. You can see the bus lanes are complete, the servicing is complete, but there's a few snags. But this is sort of where we are, and you can see from these photos as well, mainly it's near side bus lanes that have been delivered in these locations. But I wanted to go through a couple of examples of where we've been had more complex solutions to challenges, because I know how beneficial it was to us to see other people's solutions to issues. So this is Ablewell Street in Walsall, right near the Walsall town centre. At the moment, buses have to go up Town Hill, down Upper Russell Street and left onto Bridge Street because Ablewell Street's one way. But what we have delivered is a contraflow bus lane that allows buses to carry on straight on and avoid going up Town Hill, or the rather circuitous route along Upper Russell Street. But one of the challenges here was actually we had to maintain parking in this location as well, and that parking is on the opposite side of the road to traffic. And I googled it, and I actually found an example in Dublin, and we had a consultant who was based in Dublin who went out and took some photos, and sharing these photos with the local authority was really helpful in helping them convince them that this was something that could be delivered and could be delivered safely as well. So having these examples really helped us build the case for it. And I know this isn't the best photo because the bus lane hasn't been, or the bus gate is due to be tested, I think, in the next couple of days, and will enter operation next week. But you can just about see that contraflow bus lane, the start of it, and you can see buses coming in the other direction coming out of Walsall. So another example of what we've delivered, this is Small Heath Highway. It's one of the main roads to Birmingham. And this is going out of Birmingham towards the roundabout. Now the challenge here was actually the buses need to turn effectively right at this roundabout, heading off towards the airport and Solihull. So what did we propose? Well, we proposed an offside bus lane. This offside bus lane is about 1 kilometre long, and then it leads to a bus only throughobout, and then heading further up the A45. This is it in construction. So this is some drone footage from our contractor, and on the right hand side you can see that bus lane stretching back pretty much as far as the eye can see. And if I can get this to work, let me just see, here we go. This is us testing it on Tuesday. So it comes into operation on the 5th of June. But so we have to do some tests of the signals, and we've tested it with a double decker, we've tested it with a single decker, and then we were lent a articulated vehicle from Stansted Airport, just so that we know that when that articulated vehicle does come into operation, that would work safely. So there you can see that's pretty much unprecedented level of priority on such a main road in the city centre. This is another location, Aston Six Ways, a bit of a different type of challenge, where there's a lot of parking, illegal parking on the blocking both the bus stop but also the general traffic lane. So we proposed here a offside bus lane again, and to change the location of that bus stop. And here you can see it in practice. You can see it in operation, and actually it's helped to clear up some of the parking challenges, because people are now aware that they can't enter that bus lane. So it's encourage people to park appropriately. I'm not saying it doesn't have any snags, and we are working through those, but it has helped. And then these are some more quick win measures. On the left hand side is a bus lane that was already there, but it gets to a set of signals where the left hand turn is sometimes held separately to the straight ahead movement, and you can actually see a bus using that second lane rather than using the bus lane that's been provided for them. So what we have done, or I think this is another thing that's been delivered today, is that left-hand turn is now prohibited. So buses effectively can get to the stop line without any interference from car traffic. And on the right-hand side, this is right in the city centre, right next to Aston University. The before image shows 3 lanes of general traffic. The after image shows 1 lane of general traffic, where we've got a near side bus lane and an offside bus lane. So buses are able to use the underpass, cars cannot, but also buses going in other directions have priority at this location as well. So that's why we've ended up with a near side and an offside bus lane. So quickly on shelters. Now, shelters are really important for many reasons. You know, sometimes people spend more time at the shelter than they do on the bus, and that's why what the shelter feels like is really important. But actually, it's really important to our business case as well. So yes, we have benefits from journey time savings, but actually the benefits, or the facility benefits associated with the shelters, are really important. So they have 4 CCTV cameras. There's improved RTI, so they're bigger, quite big RTI screens in there. There's better seating, there's better lighting, as you can see on that right hand side, and that all helps in terms of safety perception, and it's all quantifiable benefits that we included in the business case. And you can see our first shelter on the left there, with the Mayor of the West Midlands, Andy Street, taking advantage of the photo opportunity. You can also see the public realm as well is really important, and the paving. But it's not easy. You know, there's a lot of delivery challenges, particularly working across 4 local authority areas. So it's Sandwell, Walsall, Solihull and Birmingham all have different types of politics. Even the same parties have different policies on things. Lots of them have regular elections. So with changes to cabinet members, or changes to leaders, or even changes to party, that we've had to negotiate as we've gone along. Anybody who's widened the road will know utilities are always a pain, and you can never have too much information. So in terms of doing the GPR, doing the trial holes, it's all best to have that information up front. As I've said, there's a sprint service, but how that fits in with everything else is key to get that right and understand how it all looks for the customer. We're not quite there yet, actually, with the ticketing and branding, but working through those solutions is really important. Communication. So we consulted on the scheme in 2018. We then made some changes. So we did further engagement in 2019. We've been regularly engaging with the community. We've got a newsletter to tell people what is going on in their area, and then actually the ultimate marketing of the service. And I'd say you can never do too much of this stuff, because people always want information. So even if you think you're sending people a newsletter every quarter, they actually want to be able to get information much more frequently than that. And finally, just a word on contracting. So on the A45, we've got a tier 1 contractor overseeing all the work. On the A34, we've actually split the work into 4 packages, and we've got 3 different contractors. And it's using different types of contracting for the different types of areas you're working and the different types of things you're delivering. Okay, so that's sort of pretty much what we've been doing. And to cover sprint phase 1, but what I want to talk about as well is the future and some of the policy changes and the policy direction that's happening in the West Midlands. Now we're consulting at the moment on our local transport plan update, and there are some things here that are very different to 5 years ago in terms of the importance of climate emergency and the importance of active travel. Some of these things are much more prevalent, and when we talk about a fairer society as well, we're much more trying to emphasize this point. So on the left hand side, there's an image there of how many jobs people can access within 45 minutes without a car, and generally it's around 50,000 in our area. How many jobs can you access if you do have a car? Well, it's closer to 1 million, and that's sort of the difference in opportunity between having a car and if you don't have a car. And so what we're either doing here is disbenefiting people who can't afford a car or can't drive for whatever reason, or we're forcing car dependency on those people who might not actually even be able to afford a car, but they need it to access opportunities. So without redressing some of this balance, we are in a sort of society where there's not fairness or equality between those with a car and without a car. And this is probably my most wordy slide, but I think it's really important. And this is an extract from our consultation, and it says, basically, it says you cannot just improve public transport. You need to, because it will never be as convenient as a car is at the moment. What you need, therefore, is to restrain some of the measures or restrains the use of the car by physical measures or regulatory measures. And it's much more leading us to road space reallocation compared to a lot of what we've done on sprint phase 1, which is widening. And this is also in a Birmingham transport plan as well, which was approved last year, and that's got 4 big principles in there. It's a great read if you're interested in this sort of stuff, but it's the 4 principles are reallocating road space, transforming the city centre, prioritising active travel, and then managing demand through parking measures. And it's really important to have these sort of key policy and strategy things behind you when you're trying to make these decisions. I'm just going to touch on some of those principles now. So everyone's familiar with this, or a lot of people will be familiar with this image, and it's all about how to move people more effectively in terms of, look how many cars you require to move 200 people, how many bikes you require, how many buses, and how much road space they use. But actually what's not considered in this is actually what happens to those cars once they've finished moving people. Actually, they need to park somewhere. So this is what how many cars are required to move people, and this is what the cars look like when they're parked as well. So if you think that it's not just that journey into the city centre that's occupying a lot of space, it's actually the space that those cars are occupying once they're in the city centre. And if you have less parking, then you have more city. So you could imagine that this boulevard in this example, which is in America, but as a pedestrianised area with more trees and more seating or whatever. And actually those are the sort of things that can be delivered if you reduce on-street parking in city centres. And then around the transforming the city centre element. So Birmingham City Council are delivering a segments project, which effectively restricts some of the access people have via car, so that rather than being able to drive from this example, the south side to Jewellery Quarter by going through the city centre, you'll have to go out to the ring road and around. And it's by putting in modal filters, by putting in bus gates, by changing traffic movements that restricts people from using effectively the city centre as a rat run. Really, that city centre is for walking, it's for cycling, it's for public transport, and car trips are very much being pushed to the outskirts, and the priority is active travel and public transport. And these are things that are being delivered right now in Birmingham. And how does that affect bus? Well, actually, it means a lot of what we want to deliver is easier to deliver because road space reallocation is possible. So this is from our BSIP and shows our plans for the next 5 years of where we want to put the bus priority. A lot of it comes from Birmingham in the first instance, but then in the second 5 years or 3 years with BSIP, it's in the other areas in the West Midlands, so Coventry and Wolverhampton, and the rest of the Black Country as well. But it enables us to deliver a lot more with road space reallocation. And this is sort of my challenge really around how we view road space reallocation and how we view some of these things, because generally what we do when we're looking into the future, we assume people make the same decisions. So we are saying that because there is going to be population growth, that will mean more car trips, and more car trips and road space reallocation, well, it's just going to mean more queues for traffic, and it makes it very hard to have a business case, and because the disbenefits will be higher. And also when we're modelling the future, well, at the moment, bus patronage in general is declining. Some areas it's plateauing, but that reduces the benefit. So if you're just looking this optic, you're saying, well, if we look at when we look in the future, it means there's going to be higher disbenefits for any reallocation project and lower benefits. And really, we're therefore saying people will make the same decisions. And so we need to plan for those behaviours, and we don't need to change our values. And that's not the best way to be looking at things. And I've tried to draw an analogy here of actually smoking. And from 1920 to 1964 across the US, the UK and Canada, smoking, the amount of cigarettes people smoked just went up and up and up and up. And in 1964, there was lots of reports before this, but there was pretty much the definitive report that linked smoking to lung cancer. And if we did things the same way and we just said, oh, well, now we know this, well, we'd probably just build more hospitals. We wouldn't try and amend that trend. We'd be saying, oh, we'll build more hospitals because we know this is going to happen. But we know that's not actually what happened. The governments in these locations made big decisions around changes to advertising, changes to taxation, changes to the areas that you can smoke, and changes to education to bring the amount of people smoked down. And yes, it did plateau, and it takes time to do these things. But what they did was actually plan for that, rather than saying, okay, let's just accept this as the status quo and let's accept people will smoke more. So I'll just end on these points. Is that the purpose of road space reallocation, a lot of the projects around bus priorities to change behaviours. And we need to be confident that we're going to reduce car dependency and put a network in place that actually adopts those principles, adopts the bus first approach. And that needs to be through design. Some of the examples have shown, through the shelters, through the integration with the network, but also with that wider local planning and strategy behind it. And I'll end on that point.
Thank you very much. I said this was going to be fun and interesting, and it certainly has been. So, Tom, very good. And to arrive at this point at 13:01 is just precisely what we want. So that's brilliant. Just taking a moment before we start on the questions, you'll notice in the chat that Angela Hosford has appeared, and we're delighted to welcome you, Angela. Thank you very much indeed for coming along. I just introduce you as Tom's boss, I suppose that would be the way to put you. You were appointed head of Sprint in 2015, but nowadays you're head of Sprint development at TfWM, I think, focused on procurement, commissioning, overseeing development of the pipeline, the scheme success, and the integration of Sprint into the wider network of operational services and assets. And anyway, you're really, really welcome. It's great. You can see, those of you who've been watching the chat, that Angela is already starting to answer the questions. Of course, for the benefit of people who watch the recording later, we will need to actually voice the questions and answers so that we can pick them up that way. But anyway, Angela, thank you, and welcome to you.
Yes, thank you. Apologies for my slight lateness. I'm dealing with contracting and commercial discussions today, so from my job description list that you just set out there, so apologies I'm a few minutes late, but yeah, happy to I've seen Tom's run through on the presentation earlier in the week, so happy to help with any questions, and as you say, I've started to try and answer some of those in the chat, but we can discuss those in a bit more detail. More than happy to do so.
Yeah, well, so let's get started then, because time is short. Our first question is from Andrew, and he says, in terms of working through the EP with operators, have you received commitments from operators to enhance frequencies and customer offering in return for infrastructure improvements? And how has that played out so far? Who wants to take that?
So our enhanced partnership is available to review, and it actually does include those commitments from operators in terms of vehicle upgrades as well. So it's a commitment to zero emission vehicles. There's some elements around frequencies there, but there's also the commitment from the local authorities that those bus lanes will be maintained and enforcement as well.
Right.
Yeah. And I think it's a blend really. So we're using the enhanced partnership and the SQPS, which is quality partnership agreements. So the enhanced partnership enables us to protect the use of the infrastructure. The quality partnership agreements are the bits that will enable us to get into an agreement with said operators that are using that infrastructure, that meet the requirements of the EP about the standards and the hours and the frequency of those services. So it's a blend really of using both of those tools to kind of get the best service and use of that service that we can against that infrastructure to meet our aspirations. So it's using both really. One is infrastructure, the other one is around the service that then ultimately prevails using that infrastructure.
Good, thank you very much. Darren asking about active travel and cycling, and cyclists in particular using bus lanes. What about the contraflow example? What's the scene there?
So cyclists can use the contraflow example. They
cannot. Contraflow, yes?
Yes, they can use that section. They can't use the through about because of the detection and the way that works. And it's across quite a busy, it's not just a busy road, it's pretty much almost acts like a motorway because there's nothing on either side. So they can't use that section, but they can pretty much use everything else. We have along the A34, there is segregated cycling for probably half of the length up towards Perry Bar, and A45 in our future 5-year crusts plan, we've actually got the segregated cycling that goes all the way out alongside the sprint route as well.
What I did say in the chat as well, tied to that, Tom, is that, you know, we're in some ways governed by the local authority rules around use of infrastructure. So, for example, in Birmingham, they do let taxis and cyclists use bus lanes. So, to an extent, we're committed to, if we're going to put that infrastructure in, yes, it's for sprint, and then we're delivering for sprint. But whilst the authority do let those services use that infrastructure, we're aligned with that.
Yeah, there's actually it's not just the local authority but also the Department for Transport. So for those offside bus lanes where we haven't allowed cyclists in the bus lane, we've had to seek permission from the DFT to prohibit cycling from those locations. Yeah.
Okay, Darren, I see you raised your hand, but I'm just going to carry on through the questions at the moment, if I may. Moving on to Andrew Garnett asking, how concerned are you about public perceptions of articulated vehicles? And there were attempts in the past to seek a derogation for the use of bi-articulated vehicles for sprint. Is this something that may be considered in the future?
Do you want me to come on that one, Tom?
You can. Yeah.
So 24 meters was our original ambition. For various reasons, we went through a lot of discussions with central government around derogation. They were really concerned about the precedent that sets. The minute you start putting 24-meter articulated on the network, how do you then prohibit them from being allowed on motorways, being allowed on other elements of the UK network? And there were some real reservations around that. I think we looked at the benefit of bi-articulated versus what we could achieve with an 18-meter and drew a line under that. And whether that gets revisited in the future, I think it's bigger than us. I think that's more for DFT and the bods there to sort of decide whether that's something they want to allow onto the British road network. In terms of the importance of the vehicle, it's really interesting how that's being received. So certainly in some of our authorities, they're very much like, you've promised us this, we want this articulated vehicle, this is really important to us. In other authority areas, they're more interested in the public transport priority and don't really care what vehicle we run up and down it. So we're trying to blend that and get the best of both, looking at our own objectives about reliable journey times. The vehicle is a really important part of that. It's multi-door boarding. We want to basically neutralize the dwell time, the on-off patterns, and that will also be determined by the ticketing arrangement that Tom said we're still working through. But we want to regulate the reliability of journey times across the network, and the vehicle is a really important part of that. As to whether the LAs value that or not, like I said, it varies between them, but ultimately the vehicle is one of the key parts of this for us. Interesting, we're testing this week a articulated vehicle on the network. I was on it yesterday, going down the diversion routes. I know Tom was out earlier in the week, and the public response is really interesting. You know, we get pulling up to a traffic light, we'll get the lorry driver or the bus driver next to us pulling his window down. I used to drive these in the network, they're bloody brilliant. You know, we should be bringing them back. Why haven't we had them? We love it. You know, we've got people out there photographing us and getting really excited about it. So that wasn't really the intent of the trial, but it's a kind of nice sub kind of result of it, really. It's really encouraging us that we're doing the right thing as well.
Okay, moving on to a specific element of the way the amazing shelters are specified. Did you consider full width glazed panels for the leading end of the shelters to improve weather protection? And what was the thinking behind the half width end panels, which you've actually got?
Again, I can come in on that. I'm sure Tom can maybe bolster this, but it's really about you know, we're trying to put Sprint into an existing piece of infrastructure. So in some places we can't really determine the width of the pavement. It's already there, and we're trying to fit a product onto pre-existing highway. So we've got to be cognizant of DDA compliance, accessibility for wheelchairs on pavements, etc. So all our shelters are modular. Every single shelter in every location is tailored to the constraints that it has to sit within. So in some instances, you'll find the shelters are slightly different or longer or wider. And in other instances, they basically have been modulated to fit the pavement width that we've got. And it's all driven by accessibility and minimum standards for width for wheelchairs and prams and things like that. So clearly we want to provide as much protection and as much infrastructure as we can to improve that experience. But where we can't, we've had to modulate that down. Right,
fair enough. Interesting. The topic of the buses comes up quite a bit here. So can you share any more info on plans for the articulated buses, like who will own them, how will they be powered, all that kind of thing, electric, hydrogen, whatever.
So a lot of the buses are included in our Zebra funding, which stated that would be articulated hydrogen vehicles, 24 of them, but they'll be going through effectively a tender process to get an operator input as well as a contribution via the Zebra funding as well. So most of that hasn't been ironed out yet in terms of the legal side of things, but I'm sure in the next few months we'll be able to give more information on that.
What about ticketing and off-board ticketing and multiple door boarding and making sure that things zip along and all that kind of caper?
Yeah, so that is a key part of the project. That's why the shelters are built in that way. We are proposing to have multi-door boarding. We are proposing to have off-board ticketing. Well, whether it's off-board or on-board, but it's the purpose, and it's in our Sprint standards, is about reducing driver interaction. So it's not necessarily where you buy the ticket or where you validate the ticket. It's saying that you don't do that via the driver and you can speed things up.
Indeed. Lovely. Thank you very much. Right. Now, Mike Landon's worried about antisocial behaviour. He says there's excellent content of this presentation and great to get the right road priorities, but what about antisocial behaviour and how will this be dealt with? This is one of the major barriers to general public using buses. Drivers alone can't tackle that. What's your view on that?
Yeah, that is acknowledged. That is a key thing that comes through when we do passenger surveys around perceptions of safety. We've tried, in terms of how the shelters have designed, to improve perceptions of safety, and that the CCTV can actually be monitored live from our regional traffic control centre in the West Midlands. But the on-board element, in terms of the way the buses are laid out and the more visibility within the vehicle, that is all as well as to reduce antisocial behaviour on the bus, compared to the traditional thing is what happens is people go on the top deck of a bus and cause issues. Don't know, Angela, if you want to add anything else on
I
that.
would add that's that. I mean, we went early doors out to Belfast, and I'd recommend anybody looking at delivering a similar scheme to come and go do a bit of benchmarking, come and talk to us, go talk to Belfast. There's a lot of things that have been tested and tried and lessons learned, so that's a really good thing to do. But I remember going to speak to Belfast, and we actually went on their vehicle just as they were launching, and they felt that kind of putting on a single level, stretching it out, improving the visibility, almost like antisocial behaviour somewhat polices itself, because it's discouraged because it is much more open. Yeah, just taking that 2-layer out, that kind of antisocial sitting at the back of the top deck of a bus, with the smoking and everything else, you can't hide as much, it's more open. So in that instance it self-polices, and we've done what we can, I think, on the shelters themselves around CCTV. So you've got 360 all the way around. There's at least 2, if not 3 cameras on there now, that we can download that data and put that into our police team or a safer travel team, and look at what we can do around criminal offences to capture regular offenders. So it's an issue, I think, network-wide, nationally. Antisocial behaviour on public transport is something that we're all trying to address, but we are looking at how we can improve that through design as much as anything else.
Thank you very much. Moving on, Gareth Stevens, who I'm sure has a reason for asking this question, says, have you come under pressure to introduce cycle-only lanes rather than just allowing cyclists to use bus lanes as part of this project?
Yes, simply, yes, we have come under pressure, but actually how we've designed the system has passive provision in there for future upgrades to cycling. So along the A45 in particular, we had a whole route planned that said this is where we would put segregated cycling, and that route is going to be delivered now as in the next 5 years as part of the Crust package. On the A34, the segregated cycling was pretty much already there all the way up to Perry Bar. And from there are various different options for cyclists to join the network. But yes, we have come under pressure, and it's always been a key thing that we're asked about is cycling, and it's coming through in some of these questions as well.
Yes, it's part of the story, isn't it? Right, moving on to the way that the Sprint corridor will be used. Gwen asks, roughly how many other buses per hour will operate on the Sprint route, and how will they be treated at Sprint stops? Can they use them? Have they got to stop somewhere else? How does it work?
It's quite complex. The first part of the question is very hard because the route is, as I've said, over 20 kilometres long. Some sections are much more heavily bussed than others, but in general, it's somewhere between other buses, so it'll be around, let's say, 8 other buses in general per hour. But in some sections, you could be talking about 30, 40 more buses when you're in the key city centre. And will they be able to use stops? Yes, they will. I think it's a key part of actually integrating the Sprint offer with the rest of the network. It doesn't really make sense if you're waiting for a Sprint bus and another bus arrives, you have to run to that stop. So where the sort of general parts of the service are shared, we've had shared stops as well.
And I think you've made the point, haven't you, that this is a sort of accelerator for the whole wider network in the corridors concerned. Yes.
Yeah, and some other bus services are going to get a lot of the same benefits that Sprint will have in terms of signal priority and bus lane priority, and I think that's a key part of our messaging at the very start. We did probably overemphasize the Sprint service and the articulated vehicle being seen as this is sprint. But really, as I've said, there's 24 sprint buses and 200 other buses on the corridor, and all of those other buses are going to get a lot of benefit, and actually that's much translates across to the public a bit more, rather than saying, oh, why are you doing all of this just for this one sprint service? And actually you can say we're doing it for a lot of other services that aren't just coming from Walsall, they're coming from Aldridge, they're coming from the airport, or Cranes Park, or Small Heath, or all of these other areas which join the network and will benefit from the service.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Interesting that, as you say, Tom, that the cycling question keeps coming back in, and I'm working through these questions in chronological order. So here we are again. Jack asking, have they been designed, the bus lanes that is, so that buses have sufficient room to get around cyclists when they are shared use? Has modelling been done to understand if it generates additional cycling traffic? That's interesting, but doesn't have a material impact on bus journey times is the outcome, obviously, we're all wanting.
So there's quite a few things to unpick there.
Yes, there is.
So in our cycle design guidelines, so the West Midlands cycle design line, it specifies how wide a bus lane should be, because there's a certain width that actually you don't want to be encouraging buses to overtake cyclists. So we've tried to stay within that, which is generally around 3.2 meters. Has any modelling been done to understand if it generates any additional cycling traffic? Not specifically to see if the bus lanes generate additional cycling traffic. Most of the bus lanes are in areas where we wouldn't expect cyclists to be, and as I've already said, there's going to be segregated cycle routes alongside most of the sprint route that we would expect cyclists to use, rather than impacting on bus journey times.
Good.
And also, I can see Vivian's question as well. Sorry.
Yes, carry on. Yes, yeah.
So Vivian's asked if was deciding to prohibit motorcyclists as tricky as cyclists. Well, that is actually, as Angela said, sort of the bit that's actually specified by the local authority. So each local authority has their own policy on whether motorcyclists are allowed in. So actually there are changes across our route as to where motorcyclists are allowed and where they aren't allowed, and that's purely based on the local authority standards in those areas. We tried to move to a joint standard, but it's a piece of work that was a bit bigger than just the sprint project alone.
Gosh, that's quite tricky, isn't it? I mean, that does demonstrate the realities of your project, where you've got Transport for West Midlands, and you've also got 4 local authorities who have different aspirations and different ideas and different everything sitting as a background to it. I mean, presumably that plays into a great deal more than just whether or not motorcycles can use bus lanes.
It morphs into how we actually deliver the scheme as well, and the terms and the conditions under which we hand over the scheme once we finish completion. It's quite a raft and not an insignificant part of the project in itself to manage. So it's definitely worth bearing that in mind if anybody's kind of almost got a similar model to the West Midlands, where they're sort of delivering on behalf of, but needs to work in partnership with the relevant local highway authority. It's quite a tricky thing to balance.
And what's your advice, Angela, for steering your way through that? I mean, you do have quite very varied approaches in your area, don't you? I mean, they vary from one end to the other of the scale of desire, if you like. In terms,
you've got to build those relationships. You've got to have account owners. So I look after 3 of the 4. You know, you've got to understand what makes them tick, what their concerns are. Make sure that you fully understand where their issues are. You know, we've kind of delivered the scheme under a Section 8278 agreement, so that enables us to deliver on the local highway authority. We are the project risk sits with us, so we need to own the delivery of it. But we've had to broker those arrangements and understand the semantics between each authority and what really motivates them, so that we can work in partnership and keep that partnership alive. I think it'd be really interesting moving into phase 2, because we've already started that. I'm hoping that it'll be a lot easier, because I've already gone through a lot of that pain of understanding what their restrictions or constraints or their red lines are. But yeah, you just got to keep working on it. It doesn't go away. It's a bit like the politics. You know, when the politics changes, you've got to move with it and understand that. It's almost like another layer of politics, basically, that you've got to handle.
Because I suppose that as transport professionals, you know, kind of maybe believe in this in a way. The great challenge is the politician who doesn't.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, and they've some of them are very kind of constrained. Some of them are really worried about the maintenance legacy that this leaves. So we've had to design in certain locations that is cognizant of that. We wanted betterment in certain locations. Ultimately, the highway authorities felt like that was too much risk for them. So you've almost got to modify it, but stand true to your conviction. Know what it is that you're trying to achieve. Always go back to that starting point. What's your objectives? What is it that you want to get out of this? And if actually a compromise on a bit of infrastructure doesn't ultimately affect the journey time reliability, which is what we're trying to achieve, then you need to modulate and adjust yourselves to kind of make sure that you meet that happy medium, that compromise. It's an interesting and not insignificant part of the rollout for sure.
Good.
And that's where I think we differ from the likes of Belfast, where they are in a more regulated, centralized regulated model where they can totally influence all aspects of it. It's not like that here.
Yeah, well, that's the point, isn't it? You suggested that people should go and check what you're doing, what they're doing in Belfast, and so on. Yeah. But of course, it's always different where back home, as it were, in its own way. No, thanks for that. Just to kind of moving towards the last question, Mark wants to think about the sort of the running pattern on Sprint. Are you looking at running a mix of limited stop and all stops type services, or is everything going to stop everywhere? How's it going to work?
Yeah, it was very complicated, and in terms of quite a lot of work went into looking at the stops that are there at the moment. Ideally, how many stops we would want to serve. There's currently an express service as well that doesn't stop anywhere on the second half of the route, and fitting that in as well, because effectively that is a fast running service, and we don't want to make people who catch that bus at the moment going slower because we've introduced more stops that they have to stop at as well. So there is a mix of services. The basic principle we've worked to, though, is that we don't want more than two different types of service. So there's either an express service or a local service running on the corridor, so that people are very clear that, or can be as clear as they can be, about where to catch the bus from.
Right. Now I look at the clock and find it's 1:25 already. So that concludes the questions and answers. I think we could go on quite a lot. There's an awful lot around this, isn't there? It's an absolutely fascinating topic, and it's absolutely wonderful to sit with the two of you, Angela and Tom, and get it, as it were, from the horse's mouth, experiences and realities to confront us with. So thank you, both of you, Tom, for your presentation, and Angela for your insights. Absolutely tremendous, fascinating session. And thanks to everybody who's asked all the questions as well. It's been a really good supply of interesting topics, although I find it fascinating that the things that interest us tend to be the same from meeting to meeting to meeting, and the conflict, which is odd really, between cycling and busing, is one of the things to manage all the way through this. We're all on the same side, aren't we? But sometimes we feel like we're not. So there are some challenges around that. So don't forget that this program has been recorded, is being recorded still, and will in due course, but not quite yet, I have to say, be available through the BRT UK website. In thanking people, I'd also like to thank our media partner, Passenger Transport, who are reporting on these sessions as they unfold, and also to mention my friend Ray Stenning at the inimitable Best Impressions, who produced our advert in double quick time, and to our friends at Adkins for supporting the whole thing. I also ought to mention the behind the scenes people, Patrick Warner and John Carr, my fellow directors of BRT UK, and other board members who've been working together to bring this program to action. So please do watch, everybody, the next edition of Passenger Transport, which is out a week today, to see how they've interpreted the sessions both last week and this. As I mentioned, we are recording these sessions and they will be available in due course. Watch for announcements on that. Now, thank you so much, Tom and Angela. We now think about our next session, which is not next week. No, next week is, of course, the bank holiday for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, but Thursday, the 9th of June, which will be the third in these 7 lunchtime masterclasses supported by Atkins. Tony Brown, who himself comes from Atkins, will be telling us about intelligent bus priority. Remember then that after and from during the 9th, these masterclasses are back to weekly, right through until July the 7th, until after next week's break, of course. So use the same link, please, for each session. It's the same Zoom link. Just click on it again, if you can remember where it is, and do join us at 12:30 in a fortnight's time. So with a repeated and really heartfelt thanks to Tom and Angela once again, and indeed to all of you, our audience, this is James Freeman signing off for BRT UK until the 9th of June. Cheerio, everybody, and have a good week.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.